So let me just read through the first 20-something verses of this. The Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him. They observed that some of his disciples were eating bread with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, keeping the tradition of the elders. When they came from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they have washed. And there are many other customs they have received and keep, like the washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, and dining couches. So the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating bread with ceremonially unclean hands?" And if you look back through the first 6 chapters of the Gospel of Mark, you will see a lot of criticism from the Pharisees. These are Pharisees that see his healing miracles. These are Pharisees that see him feed the 5,000 with the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. These are Pharisees who hear the amazed crowds as they listen to Jesus' authoritative teaching. But what they pick on Jesus about and what they get upset about is he's not following the program. He's not doing the rules. This is not the Southern Baptist. This is not the Justice Law, the Jewish law. And so here, this is, so that's in context. Chapter 7 is in context of all that previous controversy. And please understand, this is not Jesus teaching against washing your hands or washing your dishes. Yeah. And the Pharisees didn't know about diseases that could be prevented by washing your hands. And God gave these ceremonies partly to ensure the health of his people. So he knew about these germs. The Jews didn't. And so, and then the Jews the Pharisees completely missed the point. And so they were so tied into doing that ceremonial washing. Now today, our ceremonial washing is 20 seconds and making sure we do this and getting all the way up here and do it while you're saying happy birthday or twinkle, twinkle, little star, right? We do that for biological reasons, for health reasons, but if that was the Pharisaic procedure, if you sang too slow or too fast or finished too fast or didn't do this part of your cleaning, then they would say that you have failed to obey God and failed to honor God. So they got totally sidetracked by the ceremony. So Jesus answered that criticism. He says, "Isaiah prophesied correctly about you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, teaching as doctrines human commands." Now, in our discussion about Christian behavior, Christ-like behavior, Christian character, we always need to remember that our behavior is a product of our heart and not a mere product of following rules because that's what we were taught. Now, obviously, there's middle ground where all of that blends in, but as I said last week, on one ditch is ceremonial righteousness, the other ditch is total freedom. There's no rules for me, freedom in Christ, and we need to hit the road in the middle. Abandoning the command of God, you hold on to human tradition. I just want to ask you, if you know, or maybe have been in the past, or probably are, you know somebody, or even know a whole congregation of people who were so bent on rules, they forgot to love and serve one another. You ever knew anybody like that? And that is the kind of person that is Pharisaic we need to evolve. You have a fine way of invalidating God's command in order to set up your tradition. In other words, you push aside the real religion in order to practice a religion that you have formed from your traditions. For Moses said, honor, and then he gives an example of that, where they were providing for their parents by giving what ought to have been used to help their parents survive as tithe. Listen, all of you, in verse 14, and understand nothing that goes into a person from outside can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Now, again, this is a little bit of a hyperbole, because we are what we eat, and we are mentally what we digest and expose ourselves to constantly, and the kind of music we watch, and the kind of entertainment we engage in, and the kind of literature that we read. But the principle is, it's what comes out, because that's a product of the heart rather than what goes in. Nothing that goes into a person from outside can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. When we went into the house away from the crowd, the disciples asked him about the parable. He says, and Jesus said, "Are you also lacking in understanding? Don't you realize that nothing going into a person from the outside can defile him, for it doesn't get into his heart, but into the stomach, and is eliminated." What comes out of a person is what defines him, for from within, out of people's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, thefts, murders, adulteries, greed, evil actions, deceit, self-indulgence, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness, and all these evil things come from within and defile a person. So this teaching gives us one encouragement, and that is that as we walk through this world full of evil, full of bad influences, full of deceit, full of cynicism, full of tragedy, full of bullying, full of immorality, that we don't have to ingest that all. We walk among it. But we can be sure about what's in our heart and what comes out as an attitude of our heart. So that's encouraging. Well, I want to do I want to lead us to do some thinking about why we do behave the way that we do. So let's look historically what the historians and philosophers look at when they say, what is the source of morality? One is social construct. We do what other people expect us to do. There's also a concept called the social contract. I won't punch you, and therefore you won't punch me. If I do punch you, I'm going to accept the consequences. That's a social contract, which is being diluted day by day in our culture. Because now we think, well, whatever I do to you, I should be forgiven for because I had that day. This is also this refers to the social system, but it also refers to what we commonly have talked about since I was a teenager, is peer pressure. I think it was a preacher who used this example on the radio recently. What was the preacher's name I was trying to remember the other day? Chuck Swindoll. Thank you, Breen. You know how you can, with a computer, you have an external hard drive? So he gave this example of a research project, a study that was done by some psychologists, and they were studying peer pressure, social pressure. And so they would gather a group of 30 young people, and 29 of those young people were told, when we asked the question, we're going to show on the screen, we're going to show 3 lines, line A, line B, and line C. Line B is going to be the longest of the 3 lines, but we want the 29 of you to say that it's line C. And then the one person in that group of 30 that did not know that they were the subject of the experiment would be asked that question in the classroom. And of course, when they say, which line is bigger, how many of you think it's B? 29 hands went up because that was their cue to put their hand up, even though line C was clearly longer. And so the 30th person, 70% of them were like, yeah, sure, it's B. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that person has a character flaw. It means that person thought, okay, my conformity and my status and my relationship with these other people is more important than the truth of that line right at this moment. So we can get caught up in that as well. And in this post-Christian era, you thought you lived in a Christian nation? You used to, you don't. All right? So we're in this post-Christian era. Not just people that have abandoned the church, not people that have backslidden, not people that have forgotten the focus. So many people in America do not know who Jesus is and have never heard who Jesus really is. So in this post-Christian era, we have the same conflict that 30th student has. How much should I agree with these rest of these people to maintain my relationship with them so that I don't get cut out of the group and no longer have the opportunity to tell them about Jesus or to model Jesus? Now, I don't know exactly where those lines are, but I can tell you this. We have agreed with and endorsed and celebrated too much in order not to offend. I'll just make that general statement. You can decide perhaps what that means in your own experience. So social construct, and then the hedonistic calculus. The hedonistic calculus is, what's in it for me? Will I get more pain or more pleasure? This is often studied in criminology. So if I rob that bank, I could get $1 million, although the average bank robbery take is $5,000, in case you don't know that. But I could get $1 million, but I might end up going to prison for the rest of my life. What's the risk? What am I going to do? How am I going to calculate that? Is it worth it? And that's the hedonistic calculus. It's based on pleasure, pain, and the balance and the risk and those kinds of things. In other words, there's no inherent right or wrong. What the decision maker is am I going to suffer or not? And then another one is laws and codes. How many of you have heard of the Code of Hammurabi? The Code of Hammurabi was an ancient written code. It is said to predate the Mosaic law. There's questions about that, but it's said to be the first written code of laws historically. Now, there are other architectural findings since then that say that there are other laws. And so some people say, well, the most important code was the first one, the Code of Hammurabi. You'll actually see part of that. That's like 282 rules, but it's mostly civil, criminal process. It's not the moral code. It's a procedural legal code. It's not the moral code that is reflected in the Ten Commandments. Now, the rest of the Mosaic law that you see in Deuteronomy, and I may take that as my next book study challenge for you all, it is a bunch of civil and procedural and criminal laws. But, of course, the Ten Commandments, and one of the tragedies of our intolerance of biblical truth is that whereas the Ten Commandments used to be posted in lots of government buildings, still is in many places, that we have taken those down or covered those up or destroyed those because it's religion. It's history, folks. It's history. So there's the Mosaic Code, and there's the Code of Justinian in Rome, and the other legal codes over the years, but nothing has made an impact on the world, particularly the Western world, as the Ten Commandments, and so that's what we're going to look at here. Eventually, probably actually next week, as the clock tells me. And so some of you have you ever heard when somebody says, oh, that law is draconian? That's a draconian procedure. That comes from the Code of Draco, who was a Roman leader, and he had some very harsh punishments in order to control these people. So we call it draconian. Those are your little etymology lesson for today. Yeah, etymology. Entomology's bugs, right? Yeah. So that's one. And if you think about that, okay, these are what might be considered amoral, because it really doesn't matter if something is inherently wrong or not. What's the consequences to us, and what's our thought process in deciding what rules to obey and what rules to follow. And so you might want to think how much influence these things have on our behavior. And there are a lot of rules that aren't necessarily based on absolute right or wrong, or what intent is. For example, I've taught criminal justice for 20 years, so I slide into that every once in a while. There's nothing inherently wrong with running a red light. I mean, you won't find in any ancient literature that red means stop and you're immoral if you run. Now if you're ignoring consequences of that, then that's a morality issue. But you don't have to have intent under the law. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't see that stop sign. I didn't see the speed limit sign. I didn't see the school zone sign. That is no excuse, because those types of laws are completely man-made, and you don't have to form an intent for that, right? So if your speedometer is broken and you're going 75 miles an hour in a 25 mile per hour school zone, your state of mind really doesn't matter, because physics will tell you what the consequences are of that, right? So, now here's another one that we might want to think. And if you look at Romans, where it says, "Man, you're without excuse," because doesn't nature tell you that God exists and that there's some order and ruling? Inborn, innate, universal truths. Are we born with a sense of right and wrong? Well, they've actually studied this in the halls of universities in their psychology department. And one of the things that I ran across was this study of babies. And so parents will bring their babies in, their little lap babies, and the experimenter will show them a little play. And it's kind of like a little puppet show. And there are 3 different scenarios. I'm not sure I remember all of them. But one of them is where this shape, and the shapes aren't supposed to necessarily mean anything to the kid. So there's this round shape trying to go up an incline, and this square shape and slides back, and then this square shape will come along and help push the round shape up the hill. And then there's another scenario where there's a triangle shape, and the triangle shape interferes with the round shape trying to get up the hill. So, we would look at that as adults and say, well, the square's the good guy and the triangle's the bad guy. So there's another one where a little puppet drops a ball, and one puppet character brings the ball back, and the other puppet character steals it, takes it away. And there's another similar scenario. So how do they test whether the baby thought one character was bad and one character wasn't? Well, they take these little shapes, or these little puppets, and they put them in front of the baby in random order, and most of the infants will pick the good guy, the good puppet, or the good shape. So that indicates there may be an inherent sense of what is good and what is not good, what is favorable and what is unfair. So that's something that may exist out there. We have a sense of this, and it's intimated in Scripture when we talk about the age of accountability. Now, what is the age of accountability? I don't know. But it is the point in time where a person becomes responsible for their own individual behavior and sins. In general, in Jewish life, that's at age 13, where the boy stands up in front of the group, does a lot of these things, but basically at the end of that ceremony, he says, "Today I am a man." Now, I've complained and railed about this before. We don't have that in American society. We don't have a time when a boy can say, "Today I am a man." And that's why we have a bunch of 25-year-old adolescents in our culture, right? So when do you become a man? Women have a biological marker. Boys don't. So is it when you turn 12? Is it when you get your driver's license? Is it when you register for the draft? Is it the first time you get drunk? Is it the first time you have sex? Is it the first time when you get to be 21? We don't know in this culture. We don't punch a hole in our ears. We don't file our teeth. We don't put a ring around our neck. We don't do any of those ceremonial things. And in those subcultures, like Boy Scouts, scouting, where you become an Eagle Scout and you say, okay, I think I've achieved something here. I'm a young man, not just a kid anymore, because this I've accomplished and I get this thing. And those are going away. Scouting, of course, for a lot of reasons, has diminished in influence. So we have a sense, now, and I would say in general, and this is what disturbs me about some youth programs, and I know we need more youth outreach, and about some programs that still, when I was teaching a Sunday school class using Southern Baptist literature back in Missouri many years ago, these were 14, 15-year-old young people. And instead of a book, a lesson book, it was basically a comic book with pull-out pages. And I was like, these people are 15, That's ridiculous. What are they studying in high school? Using comic books in high school? I don't think so. Well, maybe. You got 12-year-old Muslim kids in other countries memorizing the Quran. So I think we could do better. And I know so many youth programs that are just Pepsi and pizza programs. And I've actually heard people who are ministers to young people, people they won't put up a Bible study. You can't maintain their attention with Bible study. That's allowed to put a hell, whether it comes out of the mouth of a youth minister or not. There are some very, very deep thoughts, some very, very deep questions, very, very deep issues that young people can deal with. And we should allow them to deal with that instead of protecting them from stuff. Because I tell you what, when you're out in the workplace, or you're in the military, or you're in college, those little coloring sheets of Noah's Ark are going to do you no good in understanding the significance of Jesus in your life, or trying to convey that to Jesus. It's frustrating. Here's what Mike makes, right? Now that's not just okay, he's bigger than me, I'm going to conform to what they want me to do or they'll beat me up. But it's also this sense that has been inculcated by the rich and powerful and privileged to say, I am ruling by divine right. Remember that from your history studies? In other words, I have this position of authority. I have been given this physical strength. I have been given this leadership quality by God, and therefore my might comes from divine right, and it therefore defines what is right and what I can do to people. We still have many governments like that, and we need to be careful here in America that our government does not play this game with us. Right? Now, I'll make a little political commentary here. The federal government has limited constitutional power. But what they do have is, hey, Colorado, if you'll pass this law, we'll give you $1 billion for your road. School district, if you have this policy, we'll make sure that you get $1 million in your budget. So is that Mike makes right? I'm afraid so. Mike makes right. And then there's this evolutionary idea, which in a post-Christian world is very common. We only refrain from beating each other up because it's not in my best interest, because I don't want to get beaten up. So it's survival. I go along to get along because my aim is to survive and reproduce, and any behavior that interferes with that is behavior that I'm either going to avoid or behavior that promotes that I'm going to move into. So those are there's a whole bunch of theories about morality and right and wrong, and in fact we don't talk about morality anymore in the corporate world or the academic world. We talk about ethics. It's a different thing. But we don't want to talk about it. You can't teach morality. You can't legislate morality. Well, you can legislate immorality and you can teach immorality. I'm not holding in or anything about that. How many of you know who Dr. Jordan Peterson is? Controversial character, says a lot of very interesting things. He is a kind of a fledgling convert, former semi-non-believer. And now he's kind of evangelistic in terms of biblical value and their importance in the world and in human life. His approach in his speech is not always something that we would consider to be Christ-like, but the truth that he speaks is very significant. If you have an opportunity to read stuff that he's written or watch him on YouTube clips. But he says this, he made this statement as I was looking the other day. What people believe drives their behavior. Morality is about action. True about love too, right? So morality is what you do. Your faith is expressed by what you do, not the creed that you state. All right. So on that premise, we understand that the source of wrongness is total self-interest, and I'll show you a Facebook meme. Interesting thought, isn't it? When you think about the serpent's appearance in the Garden of Eden, he doesn't say, "Why are you worshiping God? You should be worshiping me. I'm all powerful. I can do things for you." Doesn't do that at all. No. He says, "You should be acting in your self-interest. I don't think God is really telling you the truth about everything." Right? And I said, "Well, what has this generation heard from day one? You're so special. You're number one. Self-esteem is most important. You show up one time, you get a trophy." So it's all believe in yourself, believe in yourself. And we're told this tremendously stupid lie, you can be anything you want to be. No, you can't. The NBA will tell you that. So what we will explore, and I'm going to come to a close now, what we will explore next Sunday is part of the Ten Commandments, the negative side, thou shalt not do. Is it easier to proactively develop a behavior or character, or is it easier to give up a behavior or characteristic? I would submit to you that it's easier to give something up, to take something out of your life, than to add something to your life. And so when we talk about this, thou shalt not, we're also going to implicitly, whether I say it explicitly or not, we're going to implicitly understand that for every thou shalt not, that creates a vacuum that should be filled with a, this is what you ought to do instead. Okay? So be patient.